Is Deuce McBride a point guard? Who should he be playing with most off the bench? And can he replicate his huge leap last year? Get into all that and more in Deuce McBride's season preview right now.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 to get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And today I am previewing Deuce McBride's 2024-25 season. Somehow Deuce's fourth season already. Crazy to think about that he's already that old, 24 years old. And last season, he averaged 8.3 points, 1.7 assists, 1.5 rebounds, 0.7 steals, and he shot 45.2% from the field, 41% from three, and 86% from the free throw line in just under 20 minutes per game at 19.5. For his career, 3 seasons so far, he is averaging 5.1 points per game, 1.3 assists per game, 1.1 rebounds a game, 0.6 steals, and shot 40.4% overall from the field for his career so far, 35.5% from three, and 76% from the free throw line in about 14 and a half minutes per game. So I always like to look at on-off numbers. I think that they're, in some cases, very telling, though I feel like Deuce's needs a little bit of a caveat on it. So he actually, if you just look at his on-off numbers last year, doesn't paint a super pretty picture. They were the Knicks were a minus 6.8 points per 100 possessions with Deuce on the floor versus off the floor. But I sort of highlighted this with Precious. The Knicks starting lineup last year, particularly for the month of January, which skewed a bunch of data, and even after the month of January, just their starting lineup in general was just really, really good last year, no matter who was in it. So it didn't really help the bench players out too much in these on-off number comparisons. So just to paint the picture, like the Knicks were still positive with Deuce on the court. They were a plus 0.2, so not by a ton, but pretty much any bench player, if they're a positive, that's a success. Because usually you're banking on just holding out long enough when your bench is, in the game to get you back to your superstars and your starting lineup and the best players that you could field. So the fact that he was any positive at all is a huge thing. The Knicks were also, they were a +7 with Deuce off the court, but I think that sort of speaks more to the fact that he was usually coming in for Jalen Brunson. Like they were not playing together a ton. They played together some, which I'll get into in a minute, about what some of those numbers say. But, in general, he's not out there with their best player a lot of the time. And so, of course, numbers are going to take a dip. But I think it says a lot that they were still as good as they were, even with, the numbers taking a dip like that. Or even without their best player on the court, I guess I should really say. So let's talk about what his best game or moment of last season was. I had to break this into two because, there was the regular season and the postseason this past year. In the regular season, I think it had to be his 9 for 14, his 9 for 14 from three performance where he made 9 3-pointers. It was literally the game after Dante DiVincenzo broke the Knicks single game 3-point record. And Deuce had 6 threes in just the first quarter and made everybody go, oh, well, is he about to break this record literally one game after Dante just broke a 10-year-old record? It turned out he did not. He cooled off a little bit after that, but that was definitely the most fun Deuce performance. They were just raining in from him. And it was a great time during the regular season. But I think the real answer for what his best moment of last season is, you could just sort of throw a dart at the postseason and over half the games, I think you'd have over a 50% chance of finding a really, really good Deuce game. which really just speaks to what he was able to do when the Knicks really needed him, with all the injuries and everything. But if I was going to pinpoint a few of them, game 1 against Philly was huge. Game 4 or 5 against Philly were huge. Games 3 to 6 versus Indy were all really big for him as well. I mean, I think just the big thing was seeing his regular season 3-point stroke and defense translate to the playoffs was really big, and probably the biggest moment of last year as far as like analyzing him as a player and a prospect, and what he's going to become in the NBA. I think that we saw with some of the other players in the Knicks young core, and they're obviously not finished products, but we saw Emmanuel quickly struggle in the playoffs before. We saw RJ Barrett struggle in the playoffs before. We saw Quentin Grimes struggle in the playoffs before. You know, all of them mostly with the fact that just the 3-point shot just stopped falling in the postseason, and that did not happen for Deuce in this past postseason. And if that continues, that's going to make him a very valuable player, because players that can scale their production to the postseason are what is usually the difference between a good regular season team and a team that can actually compete for something in the postseason. So what's an interesting stat for Deuce? I've been pulling an interesting stat for each player that I've been doing for these so far. I pulled a couple stats for the interesting stat. It's an interesting collection of stats, and maybe it's interesting to you, or maybe it's not interesting to you. It all depends on where you fall on the the is Deuce a point guard debate, very similar to the is Emmanuel quickly a point guard debate. But so last year, Deuce had a 20% pick and roll frequency, and he had zero point 0.9 points per possession as the pick and roll ball handler. So the points per possession number puts him in the company of guys like Kyle Lowry, Terry Rozier, Steph Curry, Malik Monk. They were all within like zero point 0.1 or zero point 0.2 of that number. So just sort of a range there of who his peers are in that general category. And then the frequency was similar to Kyle Lowry, Drew Holiday, LeBron, hilariously, and plenty of other players. So I think all that is to say, running the pick and roll is a big part of being a point guard. And when Deuce does that, it comes away with as many points per possession as plenty of really good players. So that's thing one. Thing two, his assist percentage was actually the lowest of his career last year at 12.2%. But also, I think that he was just being relied upon to make a lot of spot up jumpers, and that especially happened in the times where he did have to play with Jalen Brunson. When the Knicks were super shorthanded, I think that led to a lot of times where he had to just kind of find the right spot on the perimeter and be ready to get a kick out and take and make a 3-pointer. He did really well on those. He shot I think it was 37% on the spot up catch and shoot threes that he made last year, and then shot over 40% on pull-ups, which is great too. And that further solidifies, I mean, pull-up 3-pointers usually you're taking out of a pick and roll. You try to catch your man on the pick, and then get over it, use that little bit of space that you had to take a pull-up 3-pointer, or just in general, just come off the dribble and then pop one. And Deuce made over 40% of those last year as well. So I think my point here overall is that he's definitely a good enough point guard to run the bench for 15 minutes a game, which I think is the overall sticking point when it comes to. I mean, we've certainly had the debates on this show over the summer, if Deuce isn't good enough to run the point off the bench, then do they look to get Tyler Kolek involved? Sometimes do they look to get Campaign involved. Did Campaign have some sort of promise to even sign with the Knicks for a veterans minimum after making a decent amount of money throughout his career? Was there something promised to him as far as a role there? We won't know until things start, and we start seeing how things look in the preseason, and then as we get towards the regular season. But I think just based off the data, I think it's safe to say, and just the eye test, I think it's safe to say that Deuce has developed enough as a ball handler that he can handle those backup, point guard minutes, and he might even spend a few of his minutes on the floor with a Jalen Brunson as well, if they can finagle that. But no matter what, if he's out there with Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo too, that provides a nice sort of security blanket for him. They're good enough ball handlers in their own respect that things should be fine. So I think that's my overall takeaway from that interesting set of stats, which again, maybe is interesting, maybe isn't interesting. I found that they just sort of confirmed what I thought was the case, which is that Deuce isn't a wizard as a point guard, but he's good. He's good enough. He can certainly do it. And so for that reason, I think I'm pretty comfortable saying that he can do that off the bench this year. But I want to talk about who Deuce should be playing with. And the Knicks, have two A1 superstars, I think, that are going to dictate a lot this year, as far as what the rotation looks like and how Tibbs, approaches the theory of the game, any given game, and all that. And those are Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle. So I kind of want to get into the numbers a little bit, see which of those two guys Deuce played better with, and how the Knicks should balance those two and Deuce. So let's get to that in just a second. But first, I got to let you all know about our friends over at Gametime. And Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And I took advantage of this recently. I was trying to get in on the pennant chase for the Mets and, wanted to go to a Mets game or two. And I just take Gametime and I used Game Time Picks one time, but even without it, it's so easy to find amazing seats for low amounts of money on Game Time. They highlight in big, bold, you know, little dots on the map with little fire emojis next to them and everything else, like deals that are super, super good, can't miss, want to get these seats. And I love sitting in the 100 level by the good food, or I sat in the 300s this past time. I had just a great view off the first baseline. Got to see that sweet 9-run inning earlier this week. So Game Time helped make that possible for me without breaking the bank, which is awesome because it's, the Mets are becoming an increasingly hot ticket. So if you want to get some tickets for yourself and use the Game Time Picks feature or one of their other great features like flash deals or one of those other fantastic features that gets you cheap tickets on a short time budget. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? You already know. It's game time. All right, and I'm back in to keep talking through Deuce McBride and what his season could potentially look like. And it's a little hard with Deuce to figure things out just based off like numbers and stuff. So a lot of it is just sort of guessing. But I try to use numbers to inform my takes as much as I can, and or to confirm or deny what I'm seeing with my eyes. And I think that one thing that I'll just say before I get into this segment is like Deuce is pretty versatile. I think that you can put him out there with pretty much anyone, and he's going to look pretty good because any player that can play defense like he does, defend two positions credibly, the one and the two, and possibly with his long wingspan, even, switch onto a three from time to time, like a smaller three for a couple minutes at a time. I think that I think it gives you a lot of versatility with how you can use him, especially because he's good to either handle the ball a little bit or just sit on the perimeter and wait for 3-point opportunities. Or we saw last year, he, really, I think, embraced cutting, those backdoor cuts to get in and get an easy dunk or an easy layup. I think he did a great job with that. So, but the question that I wanted to explore in my big question for the year for Deuce here is what's going to be the best combination of players to put Deuce with off the bench? And, I think that I don't think there's any really denying that he's going to spend a lot of time with Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart. I think that those two, they're the co sixth man of the Knicks this year. I think that depending on game flow and, foul trouble or, just in general, what the team needs as the first person off the bench, maybe Dante comes in first some games if they're not shooting right, or, Hart comes in if they're not rebounding, as well. But either way, those two are you can pretty much bank one of them will be the first player off the bench almost every game. And so then you could pretty easily bank that Deuce is going to be coming out with them. The question is who will Deuce be joining them with? Because I think that, there's a decent chance that Tibbs does not expand out to a 10-man rotation. I hope that he keeps an open mind about it because I think that that could be a good way to preserve some players. Also, just get extra looks out there. Maybe try Kolek for a little bit, try Campaign for a little bit. Run like some small ball with those guys running point, and then you could still have Deuce out there still have like Dante and Hart, and then potentially like OG Anunoby or Julius Randle, something like that. Maybe that comes up. But assuming that they're doing a 9-man rotation, and I think it's pretty safe to say then that the extra 4 men would be, Josh and Dante, and then Miles McBride and probably Precious Achua would be that last guy. That would be the one coming in as the backup center, and maybe a backup power forward a little bit, if they want to run a little bigger, but hopefully not as often. But so it's pretty safe to say that Deuce will be playing with those 3 guys pretty often. And so then who should the 4th guy be? And that's where it comes down to, I think, do you want Jalen Brunson to be the guy that runs the long shift and oversees, the bench coming in? Or do you want Julius Randle to be that guy that kind of stays in like most of the first quarter, subs out late with the bench, and then eventually, comes back in later on in the second quarter and later on in the fourth quarter or whatever. And, that's how the rotation ends up shaking out. And that is traditionally how Tibbs, I think, likes to run things. He likes to have, at least in this 9-man rotation era, he likes to have one guy that he sort of deems like to make a nerd reference, like the bridge between worlds, the guy that goes out there and bridges the starters to the bench. And so whether that's Brunson or whether that's Randall, I guess remains to be seen. I will say I think that there's a lot more data to go through with Brunson with McBride based off how things went last year as far as injuries and stuff, and who Deuce just ultimately ended up getting to play the most with. So just to go over a couple numbers. So in lineups where Brunson was the point guard and Deuce was the shooting guard, it's kind of helpful. They always shared the floor with Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart, at least in the most played lineups. And there's a okay amount of data with them with all 4 centers that played for the Knicks last year. So uh, it's a little concerning, maybe. But so if you go with Isaiah Hartenstein as the center with that alignment, they had 331 possessions together. They were in the 98th percentile in the league as far as lineups go at a plus 33.1 points per 100 possessions. That's crazy, crazy, crazy good. That is like just a nonsensically good lineup. Unfortunately, once you sub Hartenstein out for Precious Achua, that was the lineup that saw the second most play last year with those 4 guys. And that had 152 possessions and was minus 7.3 points per 100 possessions. So then you dig a little deeper, and this is one that you can apply for this year. Jalen Brunson with Deuce and the 2 other Nova guys, plus Mitchell Robinson, had 77 possessions last year, and they were a plus 19.3 per 100 possessions. So that's great. Again, not quite as good as with Hartenstein, but pretty freaking good. And then again, you take Robinson out, go with Jericho Sims instead. That combination played 48 possessions together and was 17.2 points worse per 100 possessions. So a little bit of a mixed bag there. Kind of makes you think that maybe Robinson needs to stay out there for that lineup to work. And, I wonder if that's just basically like Sims and Precious are not as much like rim protectors as Mitch and not as good of rebounders. And so does that mean that, basically then Mitch just has to be out there to be that big man with that relatively small lineup around him, or else it doesn't work? That might be the case. I'm not totally sure. But the data certainly seems to suggest it. So that complicates things a little bit with if you're going to have Brunson be that guy that stays out there to kind of shepherd the bench in. Do you need to keep Mitch out there then too? Is that going to be good? Is that going to be tenable? Do you want to be playing Mitch like 12-minute first quarters and then bringing Precious in? I don't know that I for sure would want to do that. But I think that it's something that needs to be explored during the preseason. They need to see if they can make it work with Precious, because I think there are going to be some times where you want to keep Brunson out there, especially like if he's hot to start the game or whatever, and you want to have a bench lineup that can come in and complement him and not hamper anything at all. But with Randall, it starts to get a little more dicey to try to look through numbers and see how things work, because he just was obviously injured for almost half of the year, and pretty much his like injury lines up with where Deuce got the chance to sort of ascend last year, because when the Knicks became, run down with injuries, all of a sudden we saw Deuce playing 48 minutes sometimes, and just in general playing a lot more minutes, because when OG and Randall went down, there was just sort of a ripple effect where then Josh Hart had to play more four. They're low on centers, so you had Precious and stuff like playing center all the time. Meant that the Knicks went a little more small, and thus Deuce got more minutes as a direct result of OG and Randall being hurt. But we do have some decent data here, I think, to comb through. So, uh, as far as lineups where he played with Julius Randle last year, Deuce with Dante DiVincenzo, OG Anunoby, and Isaiah Hartenstein, along with himself and Julius Randle, played 66 possessions, and they were plus 12 per 100 possessions, plus 12 points in the good. That's good stuff. There was also Deuce, Quentin Grimes, Josh Hart, Julius Randle, and Isaiah Hartenstein played 48 minutes together, 48 possessions together. And that was a plus 26.9 points per 100 possessions. So that's solid as well. Deuce, Dante, Hart, Randall, and Hartenstein played 33 possessions together and were a plus 8.8. But there's also some encouraging data with Precious, too. Again, small sample size alert. So, it is what it is, I guess. But Deuce, Hart, Anunoby, Randall, and Precious had 16 possessions together and were plus 47. That's amazing. And Deuce, Dante, OG, Randall, and Precious. So just swap Dante for Hart there, were together for 15 possessions, and that was a plus 53.3 per 100 possessions. The only arrangement that really didn't work well was Deuce, Grimes, Hart, Randall, and Achua, and that was a minus 47.7 per 100 possessions. So you don't love to see that. I guess it just comes down to like uh, I guess that you just need that little bit of extra spacing out there. Like Grimes certainly wasn't offering it last year, although there was that one lineup that worked out pretty well. But I think that if you're going to have a Chew out there, I guess you need that extra spacing from a consistent shooter like a Dante or an OG Anunoby or something like that to just give you shooting on shooting on shooting, because you can't rely on that with Precious. And at least the way that the Knicks utilized them last year, Precious wasn't really giving you anything extra on offense like Hartenstein was with the high post passing or the floater, or all those little things that Hartenstein brought to the offense that made it cook a little better even when they were at a little bit of a shooting disadvantage. So I think if I was gonna lay down a decision on who Deuce should be playing most of his minutes with out of the two superstars on the Knicks, the two incumbent superstars, and maybe Mikal Bridges becomes this guy that ends up being the shepherd for the bench, because he maybe fits that mold a little better where he can become a 1A when the other two guys go to the bench. And we saw in Brooklyn that, like, certainly against bench players and stuff, he could hold down that number one scoring option. So maybe this whole discussion and going through data from last year is moot, and that's who ends up being the guy that fits the best. But if I was just talking about the two incumbents that I know already, I would probably say go with Julius Randle. I think that that's the one combo where it seemed like Julius and Precious with Deuce and with shooting and with like Josh Hart potentially as well works really well. You don't lose anything on rebounding, you don't lose anything on defense, you don't lose anything on shooting, and Randall can bring the ball down a little bit to ease the load on Deuce that way. And gives Randall more opportunity to facilitate as well, which is always a good thing. So we'll see what Tibbs ends up making the decision and what he ends up testing during preseason, but I feel pretty good about that arrangement going into things. So now it's time to talk about goals for Deuce for this year, which mostly is going to be, can he hold on can he hold on to the leap that he had last year and not regress at all? And then realistic expectations for this year. So I'll get into that in just a moment. But first, I got to let you know about our good friends over at FanDuel. And you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And if we're talking betting and what I'm interested in right now, I know we're talking about football, but I still believe, man, I'm still in on the Mets right now. Somehow, despite being ahead in the standings, they were a plus 3,100 to win the World Series instead of the Atlanta Braves, who are a plus 2,300. I think nobody wants to face the Mets right now. I think they're hopefully about to take a series win 3-1 over the Phillies today, and then go into Atlanta and rock them too and march right to the postseason. So, I don't know. Those of you that are Yankees fans are probably tired of hearing me talk about the Mets, but whatever. It's what I know about. And the Knicks aren't back on yet. So give me a little time. Once the Knicks get back, we'll talk about that. But if you want to check it out, get that Sunday ticket offer, maybe put some money on the Mets. Visit fanduel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. So let's talk about goals for Deuce McBride for this year. So I think my #1 goal for Deuce, and this might sound harsh, but I don't mean it that way, but it's just kind of the reality of the situation. Put simply, I think he needs to prove that last year wasn't a fluke because his career averages are not great when you take out last year. So his first 2 years in the league, he struggled a lot with the three-point shot. He shot sub 30% for his first 2 years in the league. And it wasn't like he was getting no attempts or anything. They've pretty much fed him three-point shots his entire career. So I don't think that it's a case of like, you know, he just needed to get the rhythm or whatever. Well, I think that's part of it. But, I think that in general, he just put in a lot of work and came in and, you know, showed huge improvement last year. But his percentages did really take a huge leap, like all over the place. So, he got usually you expect with like a playing time increase and, the ability to get more shots up, find a better rhythm. Maybe a guy will, get a 3 to 4% increase in production. But he got like a 10% increase in three-point production last year. And it was sort of reminiscent in some ways of like when Julius Randle shot 40% from three in the COVID year. And you were like, man, that maybe doesn't seem sustainable. Like, I don't know. And the next year it kind of wasn't. And then he sort of reclaimed it in a way where now he just takes higher volume and maybe doesn't make quite as many of them, but um, is keeping the defense honest more often, which is good. So I guess just comes down to for Deuce, like because of how deep this team is, he might struggle with finding minutes again. He might be back down to 15 minutes a game instead of 20 to 25 to, you know, as we saw late in the season, he was playing like 30 plus minutes sometimes. So can he keep consistent even if his role is going to be sort of in flux again, thanks to how deep this team is? I think that's going to be one of the important questions of the season for the Knicks. And if things don't look good for him early on, I think we've unfortunately seen that Tibbs is willing to move on from a guy pretty quickly. We saw it with Quentin Grimes last year, where he seemed locked in as like the starting shooting guard of the future, and then within weeks he had Dante DiVincenzo in there in the starting lineup, and then Grimes just forgot how to shoot, and then got traded to Detroit for Bogdanovich and Burks, and didn't really figure it out there either. And we'll see what happens with him in Dallas this year, but I think that there's been cases of guys looking like they've maybe figured it out with the Knicks and then coming out a little soft the next year, coming out a little, maybe soft isn't the right word, but coming out just cold, like less looking less vibrant than they did before. And like that leap maybe was false. But Deuce isn't really like playing for a contract or anything now. Like he's locked in. They locked him in right before he kind of broke out, which was great timing for the Knicks. Maybe not the best timing for Deuce, who could have maybe gotten more in free agency, but it is what it is. You take it. So it's not like he's playing for a next contract or anything like that, or it's not like he was last year either. He did just show that improvement. So I hope that it holds. I also am really curious how much losing Hartenstein will hurt Deuce, because I think that when you look at the numbers, the lineups that those two shared were among some of the best the Knicks had. And, Deuce's rim shooting percentage went up by like 7 or 8 points last year as well, from like 60% to like 67, 68%. And so how much of that came from the fact that iHeart had such a great eye for him on, cutting back door and whatever. And, the fact that he was able to shake loose that way because of the attention that iHeart was drawing in the paint, and then, the ability to capitalize on it. I don't know. That'll be something we'll have to wait and see how much that affects Deuce this year. But hopefully not too much. Hopefully either Randall starts looking for him in that same capacity, or, I mentioned the other day in my Precious preview, maybe Precious gets empowered to pass a little more out of the high post, because he definitely was more of a passer with Toronto. I don't know what the answer is, but hopefully, Deuce is able to hold on to that. And then as far as my realistic expectation for Deuce this year, I would say I think he basically repeats last year, because unfortunately for him, like with the depth additions, which mostly is Bridges coming in and moving Dante to the bench, that takes a 30+ minute per game player, throws him on the bench in probably a 25-minute per game role again, and then replaces him with a guy who's going to play probably 30 to 35 minutes a game in Bridges, it's like, well, that kind of cuts into Deuce's playing time potentially, especially when you have Jalen Brunson, who will probably play 35 minutes a game throughout the season, which leaves maybe 13 to 15 minutes for Deuce, something like that, to run backup point. Maybe have a couple overlapping minutes with Brunson per game, but we'll have to see how that goes. But I think that realistically, just based off what we saw from Deuce last year, I think he should be able to keep it going as long as he put in the work this offseason and was still getting shots up and everything. He should still be consistent and a 40% shooter, and hopefully that holds the rotation spot for him. And who knows? Maybe down the line leads to something bigger if the Knicks have to lightly blow this team up in a year or two. Thanks to all these luxury tax rules and everything. Now, hopefully they should have at least 4 to 5 years with this core if they want it, because I think they're going to be really, really good together. So hopefully it'll just be a case of just trying to break through and win a championship, hopefully, and hopefully Deuce could be around for that. But I think even if Deuce did just have a repeat of last year, didn't improve at all, that still makes him a fantastic role player, one of the most valuable contracts in the whole NBA, and all in all, a guy that I think would be, I don't want to say indispensable from the Knicks, but certainly someone that would be greatly missed if he was not on the team. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for Deuce. We'll have more previews coming up soon. Gavin's coming back from vacation, so I think I'm gonna have one more solo episode, and then he'll be back, and we can start chit chatting through some of these player previews, get some more good guests, maybe a couple crossovers before the start of the season. But it's coming soon. We're about a month away from the first Knicks regular season game, so, and only a couple weeks away from preseason. So exciting times ahead. But until next time, thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace out.